Jesus says, I want you to go to them one-on-one. And the odds are when you begin to talk to them, you're going to learn there's something you've done to offend them. You're going to realize they have an opinion in this matter rather than you just beating up on somebody imaginary in your car. Jesus says, I want you to deal with this one-on-one. We've kind of redefined what forgiveness really is. Jesus is going to tell us how to do this. Matthew 18, we're going to walk through this passage. I'm going to point out various words as we go. And I'm just going to tell you right now, if you have something to write with, write this down. Because the reality is, you've probably got somebody in your life you need to forgive. You've probably got somebody you're wrestling with right now. And you're going to want these steps. You're going to want to know what these are. And if you call me up in like 3 weeks and say, what were those steps? I'm going to tell you to go back and watch the tape, okay? Because I'm going to walk it through for you right now. Everybody needs to know this. Write this down. Use the message notes in the app. Use your notes app, whatever it is you need to do. And we're going to walk through this together. Now, Jesus, when he teaches, he very rarely gives you 3 points. He very rarely says, here's the 5 things you need to do for a successful life. But instead, he tells stories and he asks questions and he lives this out. Now, but in this case, Jesus is going to get really specific because he knows how those of us who roll around with unforgiveness in our life are like those that drive around with a spilled latte in the back seat. It just begins to stink up your entire life. And so here we go. Jesus is going to say this, Matthew 18, verse 15. He says, if another believer sins against you, go privately and point out the offense. If the other person listens and confesses it, you have won that person back. He says, if your brother sins against you, your sister sins against you. Now, there's a lot there. And truthfully, let's be honest. He could have said, when your brother or sister sin against you. Because did I have to remind you? You're seated next to a sinner. You're here with a sinner. You rode here with a sinner. You live with sinners. You've produced sinners, right? Everybody's a sinner. So you can expect this to happen. I mean, some of you have heard of this passage before, and you're going to think, oh, yeah, I kind of know where this is going. But it's going to land differently depending on where you are in your life. Because for some of you, the moment I said forgiveness, you immediately thought of somebody. When I say forgiveness, you think, Sheila. Yep, I know who it is. Yep, Sam, that's it. We're going to get to what to do with Sheila and Sam here in just a little bit. But you immediately thought of somebody. Maybe you didn't, but you one day will. So here's what Jesus says. If another believer sins against you. Now let's drill down on that word. Did you catch what he says there? This isn't for everybody. So I want to give you 3 questions on what you're supposed to do with what Jesus is going to tell us about forgiveness. Question number 1. Is this person a believer in Jesus? Because if the person is not a believer in Jesus, your first conversation is actually an evangelism conversation, not a fellowship conversation. In other words, it's not, why can't you act more like me or more like Jesus when they're not even a Christ follower yet? Now, I know this is hard for us to deal with here in the South. And I know Texans, we don't consider ourselves the South. We're Texas. We're our own republic. I totally get that. I'm understanding and I'm buying in. But what I'm saying is, we tend to gloss over it and say, why did you do this to me? I wouldn't do that to you. But keep in mind, why would we expect non-Christians to behave like Christians? Of course they're going to steal and lie and cheat, just like we still sometimes do. And Jesus says, I want you to ask this, is that person even a believer? If they're a believer, we can walk through these steps of forgiveness. If they're not a believer, then don't worry about what I'm about to tell you about how to forgive somebody. You just forgive them and then help lead them to Jesus. Look what else he says here. If another person sins against you. Question number 2, was it an actual sin? Now, I've looked through the entire Bible, and I've yet to find a place where it says, if somebody annoys you, that's a sin. And friends, I wish it was. I wish I could find in there, if they drive slow in the express lane, it is a sin. I kind of think it is, don't you? I mean, if you're going to get over there, let's go over 40, all right? Come on, let's do this. Now, here's another one. You're in the grocery store, you're rolling to get out of there on time, and somebody in front of you decides to write a check. Wow. Okay, I know it only took you 30 seconds, but I felt like I lost a day of my life, all right? Now, we've all got people and we got things in our life that annoy us to no end. That's not what he says here. The real question is, was I offended or was I sinned against? Did somebody actually go against a precept of God. And that's where he finds himself here. We continue on with this passage. He says, if another believer sins against you, all right, there's our third question. Was this against you? Now, this is not our opportunity to be the spokesperson on behalf of somebody else. Well, I heard what you did to so-and-so. Well, how do you know that? Well, they told me, so I'm here because I'm offended, because they're offended, and you've sinned. Okay? What about them? They don't want to talk to you. I'm going to deal with it. He says, I want you, if you're the one that's been sinned against, then you're the one that needs to deal with it. Don't go on behalf of somebody else. Don't let somebody else go on behalf of you. I want you to deal with it. And if we get this next part right, it would change the whole world. Here's what he says. If it's a believer and they've sinned and it's against you, go privately and point out the offense. Now here we go. We're getting in to the steps that Jesus tells us to take. If this person's a believer, if they have sinned, and if it is against you, here we go. Step number 1, go to them privately. Jesus would have the audacity to say this, right? To basically, don't talk about people, talk to people. And there's many of us right now saying, well, what will I tweet about then? What will I post on Instagram or Facebook? I don't know, pictures of your food or whatever it is, or Kansas City Chiefs logos, okay, whatever it is, that's my last one for the day. Whatever your situation is, go to them privately and talk to them first. Now, I know every single one of us would love to share it with somebody else first, but it doesn't help anything. And anything that is sensitive or serious, I would encourage you not to communicate it digitally, but face to face. And I also know, because I've been in church a long time, how that oftentimes the way that we deal with this is in a prayer request. We need to pray for Tammy. Oh, is she sick? No, but her life's a hot mess. And she was so rude to me the other day, I know something's going on. Okay, that doesn't help Tammy. That doesn't help you or anybody else other than just spreading a little bit of gossip, okay? Go to them privately. Now, let me just say this. Nowhere in the Bible does it say put yourself in a harmful situation. If you're in a situation where you are being abused, you can't really do this one-on-one. You need someone else with you. You need to involve the authorities. In fact, Romans chapter 12 says it this way, if at all possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. And sometimes it's not possible. You've tried and you've tried and you've tried, and it's not possible to live peaceably. That means you are able to forgive but not reconcile. In fact, Romans 13 will go so far as to say, you know what, the government has given you authority for the ability to institute justice. And so call us and we'll help you. Find the authorities and call the police and have that intervention if that is indeed what you need. But other case, go to them privately. Then he says this, if the other person listens and confesses it, you have won that person back. Now that's the goal of all of this, isn't it? Now how many of you have ever had that experience where you were driving in your car by yourself and you were arguing with somebody who is not there? You know what I mean? And now it's great because you can do this and people just think you're talking on the phone, all right? So I'll be driving around and I see somebody, or I think of somebody that's bothering me and I visualize them in the passenger seat and I just begin yelling at them and telling them what's going on. Or better than that, I'll daydream as about how I would confront them in public and just belittle them for what it is they've done. And somebody would begin to sing and there'd be choirs and French horns and everything, and it would be beautiful. There'd be an actual cheering for me. But that's not the way it ever works out, is it? So Jesus says, I want you to go to them one-on-one. And the odds are when you begin to talk to them, you're going to learn there's something you've done to offend them. You're going to realize they have an opinion in this matter rather than you just beating up on somebody imaginary in your car. Jesus says, I want you to deal with this one-on-one. And if they agree and they ask for forgiveness, well, then you have made your relationship stronger. But then he says this, if you are unsuccessful, take one or two others with you and go back again, so that everything you say may be confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. Here's what this means. You should be in a small group because you know some other people in the church that when this moment happens, you can take them with you into this situation, not as an intervention, but as will you be a mediator. because I've got this problem and they don't necessarily see eye to eye, and I need to tell them how they have sinned and hurt me and ask if they will acknowledge that to restore the relationship. And I'm afraid maybe I'm not making sense or I'm not understanding them clearly. Will you go with me? A mature, objective third party that is also a follower of Jesus. That's why we always tell you to be in a small group. I know there are thousands of you that are already in one, but some of you are not. It's a little bit like saving for retirement. If you wait till you need it, it's too late. And sometimes when we wait till we need someone to go with us, it's just too late. But he says, I want you to take somebody else with you. Now, here's what he says next. If that person still refuses to listen, take your case to the church. Now, let me just tell you what this does not say. It does not say take it to the church service. Come on, you know what I'm talking about. Some churches operate that way. Can you imagine at the end of every service, if we sang a song and then we read through the list of sins of people in the church who have hurt each other, we excommunicated people, and we just think that this is awful, right? And some of you be like, that's the most entertaining part of the service. I can't wait to hear this. I got some names to add to that, right? What it means is, tell it to the church leadership. We have elders and we have deacons, and we have pastors on staff that can help you in these matters.